Hey there. So we're looking at perhaps this final exam question, which is evaluate the view that, I got that one wrong, evaluate the view that procedures for electing the US presidents and members of Congress are not fit for purpose. This is a US politics 30-mark answer. Usual stuff, you need a direction, you need an introduction, probably 3 or 4 paragraphs, or sections and a conclusion. But there's a couple of traps here that make this one perhaps a little trickier, or you need to make sure you don't fall into the traps. Now, as always, you've got to include both sides of the argument. So we need to say, yes, it is fit for purpose, and we need to say, no, it is not fit for purpose, while still maintaining a direction. You should know that by now. But there's a second trap here, which is that it says, for electing the US presidents and members of Congress. So you've got to include both the president and Congress in here. And it needs to be more than just using the phrase US presidents and member of Congress in your introduction and conclusion. You need some arguments that can be clearly seen to have a connection to Congress. Now, there are certain arguments that are connected to both presidents and Congress, and it's fine to use them as long as you are referring to both presidents and Congress, but you would be capped top of band 2 if there is not a reference to Congress here. Now, I marked this paper over the summer, as I might have said, and the official advice from the exam board was they weren't expecting it to be half and half, like half presidential, half Congress, because they said, well, clearly there's more to say when it comes to the president than when it comes to Congress, but that it had to be there, and it had to be more than just a passing one sentence kind of comment. So I haven't marked your exam papers yet. I haven't looked at them. I'm making this video kind of in advance, but that trap is there, that cap is there. If there's not both sides, you get capped. If you haven't done both sides of the question, then that would also get capped. So even before we start this one, when you get into the real exam, if you see any questions like this that actually look relatively straightforward, look and see if there is almost like a double question here. Look and see if there's 2 elements that both need to be addressed, and make sure you get that into your plan, because it's so easy to do, to write this about presidential elections, and then what could be a band 4 or 5 essay suddenly becomes band 2 because you didn't actually answer the question in full. So what would the arguments here be? Again, let me just put the animate on here so we can discuss one element at a time. That should do. So let's say that they are fit for purpose, that they are not fit for purpose. So we are agreeing that it is not fit for purpose. It's one of those slightly backwards ones. So the argument here would be, well, both types of elections, congressional and presidential, are both way too focused on money, and richer candidates tend to be more successful. Remember, I've told you in the past that in almost every election, presidential election, apart from the Hillary Clinton one, the candidate that spent the most won. And that's important evidence for saying that it's too focused on money. Many candidates are in a permanent state of raising money. And in congressional elections, especially the House of Representatives, where the elections are coming up every 2 years, they're constantly looking for money, looking for donors, looking to influence people that can give them money, looking to kind of get the super PACs up and kind of running. And this is a real problem in American politics, and the way that the elections take place is that money talks. So maybe they need, I mean, the question is not asking you for what the solutions should be, but you could mention the idea of state funding or those kind of elements to kind of show that this is something that has been discussed and it is a flaw in the system. Secondly, the Electoral College, which is exclusive to US presidencies, gives way too much power to swing states and leads to huge amounts of wasted votes and perhaps tactical voting. It pushes out third-party candidates. Whichever criticisms of the Electoral College you want to make, the Electoral College is clearly an issue that you're going to be talking about. And that's probably the one where I imagine a lot of you will spend your time, and you know a lot about it, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it here. You could make the argument that both elections, both congressional and presidential, are too long. If you look at the presidential ones, you've got the invisible primary, then you've got the real primary, then you've got the general election campaign, and then even after the campaign and the election, you've still got another gap before you get to inauguration. Going back to my House of Representative things, there's election every 2 years, so there's constantly in a state of trying to be re-elected in those ones. You could make an argument that says the other way. Maybe the Senate ones are too big. Maybe 6 years is too long and 2 years is too short. You can make the arguments whatever you want, but there is a timescale issue here amongst American politics. I don't know if you can see these behind me at the moment because it's probably going behind my head, but I'll read them out. You could also make the argument that in both cases, US elections focus too much on individuals rather than policies. You know, there's a lot about personality and what people have voted for in the past. You know, it's very person-based rather than actually kind of looking at what does a person stand for. You know, and especially thinking in the most recent primary, there is elements of policy when you're talking about Bernie Sanders versus Joe Biden, like a moderate versus a kind of a democratic socialist. But there's also a lot talking about their age and their past and what they've voted for before, or whether Pete Buttigieg is gay or not gay, and things like that. You know, American politics, both congressional and presidential, has a big influence on the individual as a person. Now, to be honest, I might argue that as a strength, I don't know, but you can argue it as a problem in American politics, that people are far more likely to say, I like this guy, I don't like this guy, rather than I agree with him or I disagree with him. Representative elections, House of Representative elections, I've mentioned this a couple of times already. The House of Representative elections are very, very often, and they are in a permanent state of campaign. And some people have made the point that they almost never get anything done because the electoral cycle is so fast, and they're almost never able to make unpopular decisions because they're always thinking, oh my goodness, I'm back up for election in 2 years, and that's a problem. But let's disagree. Let's say, actually, no, the system that they've got actually works. It's fit for purpose. Why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So, argument number one, maybe a long campaign is inevitable. You know, sure, it is long, but it's going to be. America is a huge country. It isn't just that they've got a campaign in England or Scotland or even Great Britain. They've got a campaign in 50 locations that are all about the size of Great Britain. And therefore, they need time to go around, time to communicate with the voters, and they need money. And so it allows time for important fundraising. If you were going to have a short campaign, they wouldn't have the money, they wouldn't get the influence, and they wouldn't be able to get the result that they needed. The Electoral College, so that should be electoral, not election. The Electoral College does successfully produce legitimate presidents. Now, you can easily defeat this one. You can talk about lots of people said Trump wasn't legitimate, but let's be honest. Most of the time, people say, yes, this is my president. He won the election. I will support him. I will, you know, Americans have a constitutional pride of their presidents, and the Electoral College does always produce a kind of 50% plus kind of a result that is a president that people can kind of get behind. Now, yes, it's easy to knock down. You can talk about Hillary Clinton not getting the popular vote, but not the Electoral College. You know, but it is there as an argument. You can say that it does produce legitimate presidents. Now, both elections have primaries, both congressional and presidential, so remember you need to include both. Both congressional and presidential elections have primaries. Did you know that congressional elections have primaries too? There was quite a famous thing where Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez won her primary against a moderate Democratic candidate. Now, let's just support primaries. It gives voters wider choices between different ideological elements of their parties. It gives more opportunity for participation and ultimately perhaps better democracy. You're not just choosing between the two candidates that the parties have put up for you. You're not just choosing between Corbyn and Johnson. You know, what if you don't like either? You are choosing between a huge amount of candidates which you can influence in terms of who actually goes forward to the general election. You can get a really good paragraph out of that. This permanent state of campaigning can also be seen as a positive. It means that representatives have to pay really close attention to what their constituencies want. They can't just go off for 3 years and be like, okay, I'll see you in 3 years for another election. They have to constantly be thinking about what does my constituency want all the time. And that ultimately, you could argue, leads to better representation, better delegate representation, and forces them to be more delegates than simply party representatives. You know, maybe the lack of power of the whips in US politics is connected to the fact that they have short electoral cycles. So there's loads to say there. Doesn't matter which side you go, as long as you build up walls and knock them down. Build up walls and knock them down, build up walls and knock them down, conclude in the same direction, and off you go. Use examples, use real life situations, make sure your examples come from a range of different places, and this is a relatively straightforward question as long as you don't fall into the trap of only talking about the presidency. Now you've watched this, you can go and watch your own video and find out how you have done.